Good evening. I wanted to start off by telling you thank you for coming to join me on this Saturday evening before Easter Sunday. There's so much that is talked about when we discuss this time of the year, and rightfully so. We should be talking about Good Friday because it's important. It's the time when Christ was crucified, and we should be talking about and discussing Easter Sunday or Resurrection Day. That is something that we should be discussing. But what I want to talk to you about this evening was actually sparked by a conversation that I had with a really good friend of mine. We were talking about this time, and in that conversation, the question came up, what about Saturday? And so that's what I want to talk to you about this evening. One way we could go about this is by following the question of what was Jesus doing during this time? And we're going to briefly discuss that towards the end. You have the debate going on when we're talking about in 1 Peter and even just early traditional writings that discuss how Jesus descended into the realm of the dead, right? You have Hades or Sheol. Jesus descending there and preaching or proclaiming to the spirits that were in prison. And the debate is whether this was talking about these angels or were these people in prison actual human beings that were just not believers when they were on earth. And so we're not going to get into that debate. We're going to briefly discuss what Jesus was doing during that time period, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. But another way that we can look at this is exactly what I want to do this evening. Is I want to talk about what everybody else was doing, right? What was Jesus's students doing during this time, and even what were those who were opposing Jesus while he was walking around doing his earthly ministry? What were they doing during this time? And so that's exactly what I want to discuss to you. But I want that question in your mind. What about Saturday? What about that in-between time before he rose from the grave? And so let's spend a little time looking at these things. And so we're going to use the text, Luke chapter 23, verses 50 through 56. Now there was a man named Joseph from the Jewish town of Arimathea. He was a member of the council, a good and righteous man who had not consented to their decision and action. And he was looking for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid him in a tomb cut in stone where no one had ever yet been laid. It was the day of preparation and the Sabbath was beginning. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. First, I want to begin by looking at the devotion in their bones. It's in Luke 23, verses 50 through that first part of 56. But first, let's look at something that is very important not to miss And it's about Joseph and how he was a part of this ruling council of the Jews. And he took Jesus to his own tomb. And a lot of people will read over that and they begin to think of, okay, he took him to this tomb that nobody had been laid in. Nobody had laid in yet. And so what's that all about? We're not going to go into a lot of detail about that. But let me say this. Him placing Jesus in his own tomb, his family tomb, that's something that would have been reserved for not only him, but any of his descendants and any of his family members. He laid Jesus in this tomb, and this, if you don't think about anything else, this brought honor to Jesus. It showed a level of respect, and we'll talk more about these things here in just a minute, but you need to think about how he is honoring Jesus right now by placing him in this tomb that he had purchased for not only himself, but his descendants. We're also told that he had not taken part in this plot and in this this ploy that they had against Jesus. And we're talking about the rest of the ruling council. Now, this is not to say that it was just Joseph that didn't take part in it, but we're told specifically here he's highlighted simply because he went boldly and got the body of Jesus to do this such thing. But we're told that he didn't take part in the plotting and the planning that many people had taken part in. In Matthew 27:57, it describes him as someone who had become one of Jesus' students. And it also describes him as being very prominent among the council when you look at this same account in the Gospel of Mark. When we're talking about Joseph and talking about him being a member of the council, it's important to understand the level of risk that is involved here. It's risky to do the things that he's doing. This man, whether he was a newly student of Jesus or had been one for some time, was putting much on the line to do this for his teacher, for his Lord, for his master. He was putting much on the line. But here's the thing, being fully persuaded on who Jesus was and being fully persuaded by whatever interaction that he had with Jesus that caused him to yield his life is clearly seen in his actions. He was devoted to his teacher, right? The devotion was deep down in his bones. It was unmistakable in his life. It's also important that we do not ignore how these women, right? We've talked about Joseph, and later on you'll see that the gospel according to John also states that Nicodemus also was with Joseph during this time period. But we can't ignore these women that follow close behind, and that these women found that it was necessary to know where Jesus would be buried. And the second thing is to make sure that Jesus received a proper burial. It says that they went and prepared spices and perfume that were used for burial according to Jewish tradition. Some have said that in earlier writings that the more spices and perfumes and things that you brought that were used during this burial process, it brought more honor to the one that was being buried. The more that I think about what's taking place here, you realize that not only did Joseph have some devotion that had sunk into his bones, but also did these women. They wanted to care for the one who had proven to be the great caretaker for so many other people during his lifetime. How ironic is it that the one who takes care of the world, who takes the cares of the world onto himself, is now in need of someone to care for him. You see the same thing, the same irony when he's on the cross and he says, I thirst. The thirst quencher is now the one who is needing a drink. Even though this is a temporary thing, and we're speaking about him being in the grave, God always seems to find a way for us to bless and honor his name. This is something that's very important for us to understand. God is at work constantly in the world. He's constantly doing something, and we get to partner in whatever it is that he is doing. But God does so much in our lives that it's amazing that by the grace of God, he provides opportunities for us to bless and honor his name. And these women were doing such a thing. It's obvious to see, not only with Joseph, but also with these women here, that gratitude is something that had been cultivated in their hearts. Only someone who has experienced the love and the mercy of God would react in this way. It's important that we understand that you experience the love and the mercy and the grace of God drawing near to you in your life. And that's the only way we see people that react in this type of way. I think of, I can't even think of her name right now, but she, during that time where there was the lepers in India, and she risked her life going and living among them and caring for these lepers that were out in the world that everybody had forgotten about. Mother Teresa is who I'm speaking about. And only someone who could have experienced the love and the care and the mercy of God could put things on the line, including her health, to be able to do something like this. Mary Magdalene, who was among these women, understood this all too well. I want you to look at something really quick. In Luke chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, it says this: After this, Jesus traveled about from town and village, one after another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out, Joanna the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. Just listen to that. We're looking at Mary Magdalene, the one who had been oppressed by the enemy. We're talking about the enemy of our souls. And we don't know how long she had been oppressed by these demons, could not help but stick close to the Lord's side, especially in this time after he had been crucified and humiliated on the cross. She needed to know where he would be buried so she could have the opportunity to care for him in this time. In her devotion, she couldn't leave because she had come to know in her bones that he was the greatest person that has ever walked this earth. Other women there, Luke 24:10 tells us that it was not only Mary Magdalene and Joanna, and then Mary, the mother of James, and there was also these other women that went and reported, even after he was raised, to the apostles and said, the tomb is empty. And being women, their report is not believed, even by the apostles. Matthew 27:55 says, many women were there watching from a distance. They followed Jesus from Galilee, and they had cared for his needs. Man, you have to think about people that are fully persuaded in such a way. Not only are they going to follow, but out of their means, they are going to provide to be able to travel from village to village and town to town. Here's how you know that Christ has you. If he has your heart, then he has your stuff also. If he doesn't have our stuff, then more than likely he does not have us. You talk about devotion, and these women who are also some of his students, must be in the conversation. You can't leave these women out if you're going to talk about devotion, and neither can you leave out Joseph and Nicodemus as well. But even with Joseph and in John, again, we talk about how Nicodemus is there. Where are the men? Where are the 12? The ones that were his earlier and his first disciples, the ones that he had called in the beginning. Where were these men at? Now, me saying that, I want to say this. There was a legitimate fear for their lives that they could be next. Totally understand that. But where were these men during this time? We know that Joseph just risked some things by even going to get the body and placing him in this tomb. He was willing to risk some things. We know that these women were risking some things as well, but they did it anyway. How ironic that this scene takes place on the day of preparation. Because the disciples, we're talking about these other disciples that were not there, are still being prepared. Let me say that again. How ironic it is that these things take place on the day of preparation. You can look and see clearly that the disciples were still being prepared. Like so many of us today, we're not at a place that either we would like to be or at a place that we should be in our walk right now. This is not the first time that you've seen that these disciples were still being prepared. Previously, they had been found sleeping on the job in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus said, I need you to stay here and pray as I go a little further to pray. And every time he came back, he found them sleeping on the job. They were still being prepared. And even when they came to arrest Jesus, they scattered because they were still being prepared. And even right now, when his body is taken off the cross and he's being put in a tomb, they are nowhere in sight. Devotion is seen in the way that one lives out their lives. It's in word and it's in our deeds that are working side by side in conjunction with one another. This is made clear by Jesus when he states that they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. When it's in your bones, when it's in my bones, you just do it. You don't wait around, you just do it. You just know what to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about this here shortly. But their devotion to God, it was deep down in their bones. But now let's kind of shift gears and look at the obedience in their bones. And it is in that second part of verse 56b. It says, on the Sabbath, they rested according to the commandment. During this time, no one had to give them instructions. Nobody had to give them directions. It had become secondhand nature to them. Webster's dictionary defines second nature as an acquired, deeply ingrained habit or skill. This means that certain things are not obtained by us without some time lapse in between. This means that in a microwave society like ours today, it pays for you and I to have patience. Dr. Daniel Napier, he illustrates and he describes this process in how we obtain wisdom. He states that we try to skip the process and get the fruit before the root. We try to allow fruit to manifest in our lives before we allow those habits and those other things to form and take root. It's how we choose to be through the process. So what does resting reveal? Let me show you something. Resting, or we can say it this way, choosing to rest reveals the heart of the rester. Let me say that again. I don't know if rester is a word, but we're going to use it here. Choosing to rest reveals the heart of the one that is resting. In Exodus, the children of Israel were presented with this same concept in their journey through the wilderness. In Exodus 16 verses 4 and 5, it says this: Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gathered on the other days, to test them, to see if they will listen to his instructions. Here's the thing: God fed and provided for them the entire time that they journeyed through the wilderness. 40 years he provided for them manna and quail as well. And when they were disobedient to his instructions and tried to get extra on those days, they found that the extra that they tried to keep did not last. It spoiled in their faces. The Sabbath was something that it brought honor to God. It revealed the trust that one had in him. It revealed that his plan and his project, or basically you can say his way of doing things, was at the forefront of their hearts. It also reveals our limitations, right? Our need for help beyond ourselves. And more importantly, it reveals God's limitless resources that are at our disposal. What does it reveal? It reveals the heart of the one that is resting. These individuals, they rested because they had been trained to do something. They had been trained to rest. Training is the means by the way that we get the fruit that we get. It's the means by the way that we get these things in our bones. This can only happen, and I want you to really pay attention here. This can only happen if we have a teacher who is qualified to guide human life. And Jesus proved to be that teacher. Let me say this again. That this can only happen, the training that's necessary for things to take root and for us to bear the fruit that we need to bear. This can only happen if we have a teacher who is qualified to guide human life. And Jesus was that teacher. You want to know why there was devotion and obedience in their bones? Because they followed the qualified teacher that knows the human heart better than anybody we can think of. You look throughout history, there have been many people that claim they understood what human life is all about and how to guide the human heart and how to transform human life, all of these different things. And we see many people even today. But let me tell you this, you look throughout history and you put Jesus up and you can try to put all of these different people next to him and there's no close competition. Devotion in their bones, obedience in their bones. And I want to close with deception to the bones. Up until this point, we have discussed Jesus' students, but I want to kind of shift gears now and talk about his opposers, those that opposed Jesus during his earthly ministry. Here's the thing, the enemies of our Lord were still at work. They had been plotting and strategizing how to get rid of Jesus all throughout the different gospel accounts. So why would they stop their foolishness right now? They were devoted to their cause, even if it meant using immoral and deceptive means to accomplish their goals. You need to pay attention to that. They were fully devoted to their cause, even if it meant using immoral and deceptive means to accomplish their cause. Dr. Martin Luther King, I've read so many of his books, I don't remember exactly which book it's in, but in one of his books he talks about how we love to say that the ends justify the means, and that process that we go through to get to what we're trying to accomplish, it doesn't matter how we do it. And he is so on point in dispelling that, showing how that is something that is not true and that is not something that you want to live by. The means do matter to how we accomplish our goals. And we have to really begin to start thinking about the means by how we want to go about doing things. Today we have so many people that are claiming to love the Lord, but we're not even united enough to strategize against the kingdom of darkness. And we wonder why people today around the world are mocking Christians. Now, we don't see it in this text right here, but even the Pharisees and the Sadducees and even some other groups during that day, they were able to come together when it came to plotting against Jesus. Now, what does that say about us in all of our different denominations, or even a lot of groups today having no denomination? What does that say about us of not able to come together and strategize and find out what God is doing and what God wants done in the world? Those who were against God strategize and plot all the time. What about us? In Matthew 27, verses 62 through 66 says this. The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. Sir, they said, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days I will rise again. So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first. Take a guard, Pilate answered. Go make the tomb as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard. Their deception, it ran deep. Let me just say it that way. Their deception ran deep. It had gotten into their bones. How ironic it is, if you listen to what they just said that there and in many other places, how they called Jesus this deceiver when they themselves were being deceived by the chief deceiver of them all. Let me say this again. They called Jesus a deceiver when they themselves were being deceived by the greatest deceiver of them all. Jesus calls him the father of lies. I want you to look at something really quickly in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. It says this, and this is the New Living Translation. Satan, who is the god of this world, has blinded the minds of those who don't believe. They are unable to see the glorious light of the good news. They don't understand this message about the glory of Christ, who is the exact likeness of God. I mean, they quoted Jesus many times, but in order to try to use his words against him. Even when they had him on trial, they tried to quote things that he said so that they could bring about some type of condemnation and that the Roman government would condemn him and put him to death. Instead of using his words that they may become life and that they may be soul refreshing, which is what they are. Where his words may be that thing that quenches that thirst and that hunger in their lives. It became foolishness to them that actually revealed the foolishness that was already in their hearts. That is why Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 14 says, the person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness and cannot understand them because they are discerned only through the Spirit. They that oppose Jesus continued with their regular scheduled program. This deception again was in their bones. It had become how they had chosen to operate. Devotion in their bones. Obedience in their bones. And then lastly, we just talked about the deception to the bone. And I want to close and fast forward, if you will, to the 21st century. I want you to think of, because yesterday we just had Good Friday, right? The time when he was crucified. And I want you to think of that being changed to when he ascended and went to heaven, and he is now sitting at the right hand of the Father. And I want you to treat tomorrow, which will be Easter Sunday, as the time where we're waiting on him to return, and he's going to come back and get his people, and there will be judgment. And I want you to think about today. I want you to think about Saturday today as being that waiting period, that time in between. Here are some things I want you and I to ponder during this Saturday. What are we doing during this waiting period? I want you to think about that. What are you doing during this waiting period? Are we being about our Father's business? Is the question. 1 Peter chapter 3 describes, again, I spoke a little bit about this earlier, about Jesus descending and preaching and proclaiming to those spirits that were in prison. He was still working. See, here's the thing. When you see Good Friday and everybody's waiting on Resurrection Sunday, on that Easter Sunday morning, people are waiting on that. People didn't realize that Christ was still at work even in the grave. It's very important to understand. Are we working right now on that Saturday? What are we doing on Saturday right now? Because Christ was still working in that time period where we're waiting on him to return. If we're waiting on him to return, what are we doing during this time period? Here's another thing to consider. Can those around you truly see the Christ in you? Not just your post of different scriptures on social media, not just your bumper stickers, not just the t-shirts we go around and wear, not just those things, and not even just the church lingo that everybody knows how to go around speaking. I'm blessed and highly favored. Oh, I'm blessed like there's nothing can ever go wrong in our lives. We love to speak a certain way so outwardly people will believe that we're super spiritual. But can people really see that you're living out the teachings of Jesus? Are they in your bones where you know exactly what to do even during this time? And the last thing I want you to consider, as I'm considering these things as well, is how can the church get out of the funk that we're in? We're in a funk. We haven't been honoring the name of Jesus in the world like we have supposed to. Very specifically here in the U.S., we've gotten lazy. We've been so dependent on a building and asking people to come to us that we miss the purpose of going out to the people. How can we get out of this funk? It's all about the building. It's all about my church. We have so many people that walk around and talk about, I just love my church and I just love my pastor. We put everything on a building and we don't associate with this church down the street and we don't do this. How can we get out of the funk that we're in right now? I'm so used to hearing pastors today that talk about my church. They say, my church. I tell my church this and my church that. It's not your church. The church has a head. It belongs to Christ. You may be over a flock, shepherding that flock, but it's not your church. We have to get out of this way of speaking and communicating and even just the way that we're operating. Because if we're honest and if we're taking a really good look at ourselves right now, the way we've been doing things, we're focused on a building and the different way we've been doing things, trying to tell people if you would just come in and not worrying about going out. If we're honest, it hasn't been working. We haven't been creating more disciples of Jesus the Christ, the Messiah. We haven't been creating more people that look like him. We've been creating more church members, people that will come in and have perfect attendance and all of these different things, but we haven't been creating more people that look like Jesus. Church has become something that we do instead of who we are. We do church. Church is a place that we go. It's not who we are anymore. How do we get out of this funk? Because the way we've been doing things is not right here in the U.S. There's no need for me to speak about anywhere else. I live here in the United States. And it's clear that things are not going according to his project and his plan. It's going the way we want things to go. And we wonder how we can have 70, 80, 90% of people in America that say that they believe in Jesus and that they're followers. And yet we look at what's going on in our country, and I would say that not even half of the people that say that they're following Jesus are actually really following Jesus. It's amazing that even now, right now, during this time of the coronavirus or COVID-19, whatever you want to call it, during this time, we have people that all you're worried about is still posting things on social media, where we're not looking to the needs of people that are right around us. Everybody has somebody in your apartment building that you've seen, whether it's a neighbor, somebody on your same floor or somewhere, or even people that work in the office that have been going through things even before this has started. There are some people in your neighborhood that have been struggling financially for some time now. There are some people all around you, and even in this time period, those that say that they follow Christ ought to be leading the stage right now in giving. We ought to be leading that stage of making sure that other people have exactly what they need. We ought to be leading the stage right now at being an ear to someone who has nobody to talk to. This ought to be the perfect time that there should be personal growth development when it comes to spiritual things. Not only for ourselves, but we ought to be helping everybody in our household, whether it's our spouses or whether it's our children, everybody should be growing. There should not be the time where we're sitting around talking about we don't have anything to do. You do have something to do. Now is the time for us to get focused on the things of God. If Jesus really does have our heart, if we really have yielded our lives to him, then I can tell you this. You would be taking advantage of this time right now. Thank God for Good Friday, when the Christ decided to do something on our behalf. And thank God for Resurrection Sunday, where he rose and showed that he had all power and authority in his hand, and he had overcome the evil one. He had put to shame his enemies, and that now we also live in him. Thank God for that. But what about Saturday? What are you and I doing on Saturday? May God's grace, mercy, and peace be with you.